Welcome to the Rideshare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
One of the best parts about being a rideshare driver is the flexibility. You can work whenever you want and wherever you want and be your own boss. Well, that's at least what Uber and Lyft tell drivers. But for drivers who are looking for more out of this job, whether it's more money, more steady hours, or just real career opportunities and upward movement, I think this is one area where rideshare driving really falls short. But there are options out there, and today we'll be speaking with a former driver who's also an occasional Rideshare Guy contributor, and he actually ditched Uber and Lyft a year ago to become a truck driver. Today, I'll be chatting with Rideshare Guy contributor at large, Jonathan Nope. Now, it's been a while since John has contributed to the blog or the YouTube channel, and it's his first time on the podcast, so let's all give him a little round of applause. That's my golf clap. But his most recent contributions to Rideshare Guy were actually his videos and articles on truck driving. Now, obviously, this is a site for rideshare drivers and other gig workers, but I love presenting other opportunities that are related, or that maybe you can even take the skills you're acquiring to, better suit your needs. And that's really what I'm excited to talk to John about today, is his experience signing up to become a truck driver, and also just what's it really like. I think the stereotype that we all have in our heads of a truck driver may not be what you think of. If you've ever watched John's videos, he doesn't look like probably your typical truck driver. So I'm really excited for this interview, and we're going to chat all about why he ditched Uber and Lyft to drive for a trucking company, what his thoughts are about the future of trucking too, with self-driving cars and self-driving trucks coming onto the street. And we'll really dig into the details of what it takes to be a truck driver, the good and the bad, and of course, how much money you can make, because that was the one surprising thing for me. The salaries are pretty good, and these truck drivers are in high demand. So I think that's one thing that I always recommend drivers look out for, right? When demand is high, right, that's typically when you are in a position to take advantage, right? Whether it's through higher pay or negotiating a better contract or whatever it might be. So definitely John will share some feedback there, and make sure you stay tuned to the end too, because I'm going to ask John about his future plans now that he's been doing it for a year. Has he had enough, or will he continue moving up the ladder with truck driving? So make sure you stay tuned to the end and you can hear his answer there. Now, John Nope is a long-haul trucker, former rideshare driver, and occasional contributor on the Rideshare Guy blog and YouTube channel. After finishing college in the aftermath of the Great Recession, John started driving and working various freelance gigs to escape the horrors of working in retail. And in his spare time, John enjoys hiking, camping, video games, and employer-sponsored health coverage. So welcome, John. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm excellent. As I mentioned, you are occasional contributor to the Rideshare Guy. It's been a while since we had you back on because of what you've been up to lately with the truck driving. So I'm really excited to chat with you about that today. And, the first thing I kind of am just curious about before we dig into the details is, what's one thing that surprised you most about being a truck driver? Maybe something you weren't expecting or surprised by.
Definitely the hours are pretty long. I think that's something that is kind of apparent going into it. But once you get into it and you start actually driving, it is a pretty big commitment. You're away from your family and away from your home a lot of the time. But it's definitely comes with some pretty big benefits in terms of the pay and the healthcare and whatnot. So like most things, it is a trade-off.
Yeah. It is funny how some of these jobs that we do, whether it's rideshare driving or truck driving, with rideshare driving, it's like, wow, believe it or not, you're going to do a lot of driving, with truck, you don't really realize it until you're actually doing it. You're like, wow, I put 200 miles on my car today, or, I put 1,500 miles a week. And, with truck driving, obviously the miles I think is obvious, but it's also the time. It sounds like the time away from family, the time on the road that really, until you're doing it, it sounds like it's hard. Even though people tell you, it's hard to kind of really understand what it's like until you do it, right?
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely an adjustment. And if you've done a lot of traveling before, it's kind of similar to camping in a lot of ways, in terms of finding showers, finding places to eat, just living on the road. It's definitely a lifestyle adjustment, but you do get used to it after a while.
Yeah. So tell me, why'd you stop driving for Uber and Lyft? And I guess you've done a number of freelance gigs and gig works. I don't know what you considered yourself before you stopped, but whatever you stopped, why'd you stop that?
I was kind of in a transitionary period in my life. I was kind of between jobs, kind of between housing as well. And so trucking was a great way to kind of find both a steady paycheck and kind of house myself for a lot of the time, because you are in the truck for most nights, living out of it. So it's sort of killed two birds with one stone there.
So when you say you were between jobs, was this, I know you had another, some writing stuff that you were doing, and then the gig economy, and then you're doing some freelance stuff. So what do you mean by sort of in between jobs, just so I know?
It's kind of inconsistent,
Gotcha.
in terms of the freelance work, and also in terms of Uber and Lyft. Sometimes it's hard to motivate yourself to actually get up and get out there and drive. When you're trucking, it's kind of, you don't have much choice. You wake up and you're in the truck. So
yeah,
kind of makes it a little bit easier to sort of motivate yourself. You don't have to really put a lot of thought into managing your time, because
someone's doing it
the government's kind of there doing it for you.
Yeah, well, that's actually an interesting point, and it's one that, a lot of people like rideshare driving because they do have that freedom and flexibility, but I could sort of see the converse of it, right? When you do have to motivate yourself a lot, when you've got someone telling you where to drive and when to drive, and you're literally 1,000 miles away and you have to be there, by a certain day or a certain time, you probably don't have a lot of choice. I don't know, do you think it's a sort of a case by case, or what have you found in your experience, because you've done everything?
It's definitely makes it a lot easier to kind of, you don't have to really put a lot of thought into managing your time. The company tells you where your stops are, where you're going to get fuel, gives you even directions to each place. So there's not a whole lot of independent thought that has to go into it. You can kind of, once you learn the ropes, you can just kind of put yourself on autopilot and get the job done, which leaves a lot of sort of brain space, I guess, if you will, for listening to podcasts. I know some truck drivers, they'll learn a language while they're driving a truck, or
very cool.
They'll, pick up a new hobby, listening to audiobooks and podcasts and that kind of thing. So although you are, putting a lot of time into it, you also have a lot of kind of mental headspace that you have an opportunity to fill with whatever you want.
Yeah, no, that is a cool point. I do kind of wonder, though, how many people take advantage of that time, right? Kind of like what we joke with rideshare drivers is that, hey, when you're in between rides, you've got downtime, you're waiting, don't go on Facebook, go do something that's actually useful. Get outside of the car and stretch, or, download the Duolingo app and learn a new language. But I have a pretty strong feeling that most drivers don't do any of that. So I don't know if it's any different in trucking, but it sounds like you're at least able to take advantage of that in some respect.
Yeah, it depends on the person, I think. Again, it comes down to your level of motivation, but it definitely is different when you're truck driving, because you are a lot of the times just on a straight stretch of highway for a lot, multiple hours.
You sort of have to do something else, right, to not go crazy, I guess you would say.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just sort of picturing, I'm imagining like I'm at a truck stop and I meet a trucker and he's, is fluent in Chinese or something like that. I just feel like that would be such a interesting person to talk to.
Yeah, there probably aren't a whole lot of them. Truckers, the stereotype of the older kind of guy with a pot belly who, drinks beer and listens to country music is not entirely off base. There are a lot of truckers out there like that, but I think the industry is definitely changing as a lot of those guys are retiring and younger people are coming into the industry. It's getting a lot more diverse. So.
Yeah, what does the typical truck driver look like these days? You're out there on the road. I'm assuming that you're interacting with a lot of them at truck stops and rest stops and things like that.
It's a pretty good cross section these days.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot of different kinds of people from all over. Okay. It's definitely when you go to a truck stop, you don't see people from that area necessarily. You see people from all over, so it's a big melting pot.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm someone who, hypothetical, I'm ready to go out and become a truck driver. What's the first step that I might take, or, really, how do I become a truck driver?
I guess your first step is going to be to look at what's kind of available in your area. Mm-hmm. Although it is sort of a kind of job where you travel like 90% of the time, you are going to want to go back to a home base at some point, unless you want to live in the truck permanently, which is an option. But it kind of depends on what's available in your area in terms of whether you want to go to like a vocational school and go through a training program and graduate with your CDL and then pick a company that you want to work for, or whether you want to go and train with a specific company go through their specific training program, and then kind of graduate directly into your first job with that company.
And I'm assuming vocational school, that's more upfront cost for you. You have to pay for that. And then the other option, I'm assuming they subsidize some of it or all of it.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of times when you go through a vocational school, a lot of the companies that hire folks right out of those schools, they do offer tuition reimbursement programs.
Oh, cool.
So you might not actually be spending a whole lot out of pocket in the long term, but to get started with trucking, you do have to come up with a little bit of cash. It's kind of like going to, joining the military or learning like welding or something. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of thing where you do need some significant training in order to hit the road.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which option did you pick?
I went with the company training with a company called Millis Transfer. The school lasts for about 3 weeks. And once you go through the classroom portion, they put you in a truck with a trainer, and then you drive your trainer's truck for about 6 weeks. And he sits in the passenger seat, the whole time and helps you not crash into things and makes sure you're following the laws and all that.
Wow, it sounds like pretty thorough training, especially compared to maybe a rideshare driver who signs up from their couch and then a few days later they are approved and can hit the road and take their first trip.
Yeah, I mean, there are similarities, I think, in terms of their willingness to accept new people into the industry. Uber and Lyft are kind of famous for hiring whoever, as long as they have a clean background check. And trucking is very similar. A lot of the companies that train drivers will take you kind of no matter what, as long as you've got a relatively clean criminal record and driving history and whatnot. So it's pretty easy to take that first step, and get in. Completing the programs definitely takes a little bit of determination. It's definitely a challenge to make it through, but it can be done.
How long have you been a truck driver for now?
I have been driving for about a year. I went to the training program at the end of February of last year.
Okay.
So my 1 year anniversary of solo trucking is actually tomorrow.
Oh, wow. Perfect timing. Well, so what's real quick, I have a funny question. What's the kind of nomenclature for a truck? Do people call them truck drivers? What do you tell people when someone asks you what you do? What do you say? I'm a truck driver?
Yeah, typically I tell them like I'm a long haul trucker.
Okay.
It's interesting that at truck stops, they refer to people as professional drivers. But it's kind of interesting because, that term can obviously apply to Uber and Lyft drivers, I think, as much as truckers.
Yeah. Who calls them professionals at the truck stops? You guys call that to each other, or
mostly like the over the truck stop PA when they need to yell at people for taking too long at the fuel island. They'll say, "Attention, professional drivers, please pull forward after refueling."
Oh, interesting. It sort of reminds me of like how Uber calls all their drivers driver partners, right?
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm curious to know, what's the one thing, when you were looking at truck driving, what's the one thing and doing your research that attracted you most to truck driving? Was it the money or the hours or you talked about the, I guess, career opportunities? What was the one thing that attracted you most to truck driving?
I'd have to say the money, to be honest. It is pretty good. At my current company, they guarantee you $50,000 in your first year of trucking.
Wow. And that's like a normal W-2 salary, $50,000 or?
Yeah, that's correct. It makes it easier to qualify for a mortgage and whatnot. And in terms of the long-term picture, it's true that self-driving trucks are coming for this industry. I think there's no way around that, but in terms of the timeline for that, I think it's probably a few years off at least. Yeah. And until then, there's definitely, the more you drive it consistently make more money, the more experience that you have. And if you add additional certifications, like if you're willing to drive oversized loads or hazmat materials, you can definitely also get a lot more money.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I see a lot of ads all over the place, especially when I'm driving outside of the city, when I'm on road trips, I feel like I always see ads for truck drivers. And I feel like I've seen numbers thrown around, average salary, 50, 60, 70,000, 90,000. I feel like I see some pretty impressive numbers from time to time. I don't know if you know any offhand, but it sounds like you feel the same way.
Yeah, definitely. Walmart is one of the most sought after employers in trucking, actually, which is kind of ironic because they're so well known for not paying their store associates very well. But if you drive a truck for Walmart, their starting salary is like $86,000 a year.
Wow.
You have to have, I think, 30 months of experience, and I think they limit you to like one moving violation in that time.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be a very good truck driver in order to get that kind of position. But it is out there. Another one of the really high paying ones is if you're a local fuel tanker driver, if you're willing to like drive tank loads of gasoline to the gas stations. That's another job where a lot of guys are out there only 4 or 5 days a week, getting home every night, and they're taking home, similar salaries of like $70,000, $80,000 a year.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And, I know you've done a couple articles on truck driving for us and a couple videos too over on the YouTube channel. We'll leave a link in the show notes if anyone wants to go and check those out. But that was the one thing that stood out to me when reading about your experience is that, when people think of long haul trucking, I guess they think of long haul, right? It's not just long haul. It sounds like there's quite a few different opportunities within the space where, it's not just, out on the road. I mean, maybe at the start, it sounds like you got to build your time and your experience, but it sounds like there's a lot of options down the road.
Definitely. Yeah. It's the career path is very structured in that you do have to start out with that long haul kind of schedule. There are also regional options where you can go out for runs that are like 6 days long and then get home for a day and a half every week. But you do generally have to stay out during that first year. You have to stay on the road most of the time in order to get those high paying local positions.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess to me, I guess it all depends on your perspective and your situation in life. But I mean, a 1 or even a 2 year training period compared to other jobs is very minimal, right? I mean, if you're making, if you can be making 90, let's say best case scenario, if you're at the top of your field and you can get this Walmart job in less than 3 years of basically training, I think $90,000 is a much higher salary than if you were to go to college for 3 years.
Absolutely.
And come out making that. So it's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, it's definitely easier than, going to school to become a lawyer or a doctor. The money's, maybe not all the way up there, but it's pretty close, especially for the amount of time that you're putting in.
Yeah. And I think also too, if you're one of the best, that's one thing that I like too. It sounds like if you're one of the best drivers, you get rewarded for it. There's a lot of demand for drivers. If you're willing to get extra certifications and do this and do that and go above and beyond, you get paid more, which, we don't often always see that in some, rideshare or some of these other services. If I'm a 4.99 star rated driver, for the most part, I don't get anything better or extra than the driver who's just hanging on at 4.65, right?
That's very true. And I think there is a little bit of luck involved in coming out of it after a number of years with that really spotless record.
Gotcha.
Especially if you get into any type of accident, even if it's not your fault, a lot of, accident lawyers and people like that will be looking at you, every aspect of what you were doing at the time of the accident, to try and find something that they can pin on you and get some money out of the company or out of you or out of your insurance. Truck accidents are a big business for a lot of the lawyers in the law field. So if you can make it out without hitting anything, that's really the key. That's really the key. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I could kind of imagine. I can see that whole side of things too, with, people seeing either the drivers or the companies as targets. So I guess the real question is, have you had any moving violations or accidents yet?
I have. I got a speeding ticket out in Ohio one day.
Okay.
I had just merged onto the highway and I had the pedal down because I was trying to get up to highway speed.
Yeah.
Didn't realize it was a 60-mile-an-hour highway as opposed to a 65 or a 70. And right as I was coming up on my first speed limit sign, there were a couple DOT officers there waiting for me. It's definitely hard.
So are these special police officers or?
Yeah. There's
like,
there's
can
sort
a
of
cop
like
give a truck driver a ticket, or does it have to come from someone special?
Cops can give out tickets, but there's sort of a special division of the cops that are the DOT guys, and they hang out at way stations, and they also set up inspection stations where they'll pull you over and inspect the whole truck and give you any tickets if you've got missing tail lights or your tires aren't thick enough, that kind of thing.
That kind of reassures me as someone who's out on the road, not in a big rig truck, that they keep these truck drivers to strict standards. Because I mean, you're in a huge vehicle. I don't know what these things weigh, 10, 15 tons. I don't know how much the weights are, but
40
tons, right? I mean, that's, a typical car, I think, is in the 2 to 3 ton range, right?
Right.
So, I mean, it's a big vehicle and moving quickly. So I guess that sort of weirdly reassures me. I don't know how you feel about that, but.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. There was that crash recently in Colorado. It was just tragic where the guy's brakes weren't working, and that's the kind of thing where having the DOT out there is definitely motivation for drivers to do their pre-trip inspections, make sure all their equipment is in good working order. And it is really a matter of keeping the public safe because, you're 8-9 feet above everyone. You're not really at risk if you're in a crash, but it's everyone else on the road that's definitely in danger.
You'll just squish people.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate your honesty. I think maybe not everyone would tell the truth when they're asked if they've gotten a ticket yet. I think we can all relate, to getting speeding tickets. So I appreciate that honesty and insight. I'm curious to know a little bit more about the actual life of being a truck driver. What are some of the best and worst parts you found?
As an introvert, it's really nice not having to talk to passengers. You don't have to deal with email hardly at all. It's very zen.
Yeah.
You're just out there and you can determine what you're listening to. You can determine the temperature of the cab. You can determine what you're going to eat that day for the most part. So you definitely have sort of a lot of control over your environment. Even if you don't have a whole lot of control over your schedule, you are kind of able to dictate, when you want to stop, go to the bathroom. You do have some leeway in terms of when you're going to get up, when you're going to go to bed. So although you are committing a lot of time, you do have a little bit of flexibility in terms of how you structure your day.
What type of person do you think is the best fit for being a truck driver?
Definitely someone who is patient. There's a lot of waiting around. And in the learning process, too, there's a lot of times where I got the sense during my training that what they were looking for wasn't necessarily so much trucking ability. To be honest, I think a lot of the other people in my class kind of caught on to a lot of the maneuvers and the driving habits faster than I did. What really counts, I think, when you're training is just patience and just the willingness to kind of take a breath and evaluate the situation. Obviously there are some things that require reflexes, but if you're thinking ahead and looking ahead, you can kind of anticipate those. Yeah, there was one guy in my class who actually didn't make it through the program, even though he, for the most part was catching on, but his attitude was really, I think, what got him dismissed, if you will, from the program, because he was out there, getting frustrated and jamming the gear shifter around and just kind of not demonstrating that headspace that you kind of have to be in if you're going to be doing it for 12 hours a day.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. I think if you can't get through training, it's probably going to be a tough one to do 12 hours a day, 5-6 days a week, for a year or more. So that makes sense. Sure. What's the biggest downside or, sort of negative about truck driving you found in your experience?
I'd say the biggest downside is not having the features of a normal house. In the summertime, the company usually puts a limit on how long you're allowed to idle the truck for. And when you don't have air conditioning, if the truck isn't on, it can get pretty toasty in there.
Yeah.
So that's something I miss. In terms of like showering, you don't get to shower every day.
Yeah.
There's some times where the loads will line up where you're just running all the time. And it'll be like 3 or 4 days before you are able to take a shower. So that gets pretty unpleasant. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot of downsides. I think everybody has like that really bad day in trucking, where like everything goes wrong. You blow a tire, the shipper messes up the load. You have to go back and switch trailers and whatnot. But for the most part, I think it's pretty tolerable.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you're describing are a lot of the creature comforts that, you and I and probably everyone listening is really used to. I mean, we're all used to, taking a shower a hot shower, even whenever we want, and from most people having AC and things like that. Do you think that you kind of have to be, just the type of person that doesn't care that much about that stuff, or do you just get used to it? You know what I mean? Like when I go camping, I'm okay with not showering for a couple days, but if I had to go a week, I don't know. I guess I don't know that I would be okay with it until I actually do it,
Yeah, it is one of those things where you do kind of get used to some of the downsides.
Okay.
I've definitely taken a few showers using wet wipes before. So, you develop kind of strategies over time to kind of deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe I'll have a tip for you. You tell me if you like this. Like when I go surfing, I fill up a gallon bottle of water and I put it outside so that it's in the sun so that when I come back, it's nice and warm. And then I take a shower basically right there by my car. And I feel like that actually works pretty well. It's a lot of water. And sometimes I'll admit I don't take a shower after I go surfing and I do that instead.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. You might get some funny looks from folks in the truck stop, but I'll definitely consider that.
All right, cool.
That's one thing. You definitely always have neighbors, when you're trucking. A lot of these truck parking locations, you're kind of crammed in there like sardines. So you're by yourself, but you're never like alone, which can be a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I was wondering about. I mean, have you made friends, with other truck drivers, or what's the community like? What's that part like?
I wouldn't necessarily speak super highly of it. There is one. There is kind of some camaraderie. A lot of the truck stops have like lounge areas where you can go and make small talk. And a lot of drivers definitely are eager to make small talk with you, having been in the truck for hours on end or whatever. But it does have a tendency to get political a lot of the times. Trucking is very conservative.
Oh, you mean like real political conversations or?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they'll rail about the DOT and the government. Taxes, why not? So that can get a little out of hand sometimes. There's also the CB radios that a lot of truck drivers have. So, sometimes you'll hear people talking about fishing gear, motorcycles while they're driving down the highway. So there's definitely opportunities for connection. I can't really say that I've taken advantage of a lot of them. There's definitely a sort of generational difference with a lot of the truckers out there.
Okay. Well, I mean, it also sounds like this probably isn't the type of job that you want to do if you want to chat with a bunch of people and make a bunch of new friends, right?
For sure. I mean, you can definitely talk on the phone while you're driving.
Yeah.
That's how I stay in touch with my family and friends. I do a lot of phone calls, but in terms of meeting people, not so much.
Cool. So, to wrap up things here, I'm curious to know, what's your plan going forward? Are you planning on making this a long-term career or try to keep moving your way up and take advantage of whatever opportunities come your way? What's your plan here?
That's a great question. After finishing my year and, paying back my my training tuition, I'm kind of at a crossroads in terms of staying at this company and looking for a new company. I'm not unhappy with this company, but I'm definitely, on the job boards pretty regularly, seeing if there's anything better out there.
Yeah.
There's definitely one company in Atlanta, a couple of companies that I'm looking at, that offer kind of a part-time OTR schedule, where instead of being out for 3 weeks and then being home for 3 days, you're out for 2 weeks and then you're home for 1 week.
Oh,
so
cool.
you're only really at work like 2/3 of the time. And of course, that means you're making a lot less money, but I'm definitely looking at that, looking at adding some certifications. And then in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about what I'm going to do next, whether it's continuing to freelance or something else, kind of blue collar, once those self-driving trucks hit. So, always something to be thinking about.
Yeah, cool. Well, awesome. It sounds like you have some ideas for where you're going to go in the next year or two, but also thinking about the future. So definitely sounds like a good plan. Anything you want to share that we didn't touch on?
I think it's definitely a good gig for people that are maybe in a transitionary period trying to figure out what to do next with their lives. It is kind of white hot right now in terms of the demand for new drivers. I think because of the economy and the freight situation, but there are kind of some indications that it might be slowing down in the future. I just read an article today, actually, that orders for new trucks are actually down significantly since a year ago. And there could be a lot of different reasons for that in terms of like the trade situation internationally. But there are kind of some signs that it might be slowing down in the future. So I think if you're thinking about getting into it, now is definitely a great time.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all your thoughts. Like I mentioned, you actually wrote a couple articles and did a couple videos on your truck driving experience too, which we'll leave a link to in the show notes. People can go find those. And, you've got a lot more detail about the sign up process and the actual experience. And then the videos are great too. So, John, appreciate you coming on and look forward to hearing what you're up to in the future.
Right on. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
All right. Take care.
Take care.